Kraven the Hunter is a movie that makes no sense to me. Neither does Venom or Morbius. My liver is still recovering from Madam Web. Sony has been on a streak of releasing movies in their own cinematic universe with Spider-Man villains. And yet none of these movies involve Spider-Man. Bro, Sony has become so obsessed with creating this big cinematic universe that they've kind of forgotten to make good movies. So at this point, I don't really understand why they're making a Kraven the Hunter movie. I love Aaron Taylor Johnson, and I think he would crush this role, and I also love the character. But to me, it makes more sense to introduce this character in a Spider-Man movie, considering he's a Spider-Man villain. It's different when we get a solo Joker movie because he's been introduced in so many Batman projects that I think it's okay to make a solo project for him. I want to feel the presence of this character as a villain and not a protagonist, and I think knowing nothing about this character and seeing his impact when he arrives as a threat in a Spider-Man movie is a much better way to handle this character and really make him feel imposing. Imagine if Morbius was introduced in a Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man finds victims of vampire attacks. Yeah, he would immediately feel like a villain. We really don't need an origin movie for all these characters that don't even really have their own comic books. All these movies do is make these characters feel more like anti-heroes than villains. As fun as the Venom movies are, they've made that character into some goofy superhero. Yeah, I still have a good time watching those movies, but I'd love to see a monster Venom that actually feels threatening. He's no longer an intimidating monster because Sony wants to keep making superhero movies out of their villains. If they want to make superhero movies, that's fine. Just make more movies like Spider-Verse, which it seems like they don't really have that much creative input on, and that's probably why those movies are so good. I'd happily watch a Spider-Man 2099 movie or even a Spider-Pig movie at this point because I just don't care about these villain origin stories. Turning your villains into heroes makes them less intimidating and completely changes the mainstream perception of the characters. And when they actually try to remind you that these characters are villains, it falls apart because they've already established them as heroes. We got that Venom 2 post-credit scene where it seemed like he wanted to kill Spider-Man and that went nowhere and it didn't really make any sense. The mid-credit scene in Morbius was one of the most horrendous things I've ever seen. It felt like a desperate attempt to set up a team-up movie. The scene felt like something that a 5-year-old wrote. We should team up to fight Spider-Man. The sad part is that's basically what the dialogue was. Did they forget about the ending of Homecoming where the Vulture didn't want to kill Spider-Man anymore, or did they even pay attention to the whole movie of Morbius because he really wasn't a villain? The best thing about that movie is this scene.
Have sex, excel, put my hands against.
And that's it. And Madam Web, where do I start? Sony, I'm happy you tried to make a movie that wasn't a villain origin story, but what the hell was that? This movie makes me sad. It makes me really sad that it was able to even be in theaters. While the premise seemed cool, they did not follow through. And like Morbius and Venom, they originally had a plan to include Spider-Man, and that fell through. The dialogue was horrendous, the story was filled with plot holes, and it's insanely cheesy. The only redeeming thing about it was the laughable villain.
Where's my spider? They took my spider.
That dude actually made me crack up a lot because his dialogue was the worst. To me, he's the hero of the movie, and he happens to be a villain. Every Sony-Verse movie has felt like it's straight out of 2003, and it has me wondering if that's why they chose that time period for Madam Web. These movies just feel lazy, like they've sat on these scripts since 2003 and just finally decided to use them. This universe has become a giant joke, and while I give the MCU a lot of shit, that universe at least makes sense and has more to work with. It feels weird to make movies based off the characters that are only associated with Spider-Man. I can't help but feel that Sony is milking every Spider-Man related character they have at the moment because there's really nothing else for them to make. Morbius could have been a great R-rated vampire movie in the horror genre. They maybe would have brought in more than just comic book fans and actually would have brought in fans of the horror genre, and they could have made more money. They messed up by trying to make it fit in a crappy universe. Maybe they're taking notes and they're taking this into account with their new Craven movie by making it rated R, but I still can't help but feel that they're just trying to keep building their universe by adding a character like the Rhino. While the trailers make it look like a John Wick type movie, I have a feeling it's still going to follow the same generic formula. Honestly, I don't really know what Sony should do at this point because I get it from a business perspective. It makes sense to hold on to the Spider-Man rights because he brings in insane amounts of cash. Maybe just stop trying to build this cheap universe and make good solo movies. If Craven ends up being good, then I'll look like a fool and I'll be happy to be wrong. We'll see if that happens. I hate to be this bitter, but these movies really don't help the image of the comic book genre, and I really want to see good comic book movies, and I think this universe really hurts it, and it's so stupid to have two different Marvel universes. And I would imagine it's very confusing for the general audiences. It's just an easy way for Sony to piggyback off the success of the MCU. What are your thoughts on the Sony-Verse, and do you think they should stop this nonsense? Let me know your thoughts down below. So, yeah. Bye.